First and foremost, inflation is a term used to describe a growing trend in the economy's overall price level. Inflation is often characterized as a situation in which there is an excess of money chasing an inadequate amount of commodities. On the other hand, deflation is a fall in the overall price level of goods and services in the economy. It is the opposite of inflation. And lastly, stagflation refers to the state of an economy when unemployment is high and inflation is high at the same time.
Continue to the second question, which what are various degrees of inflation? As we all know, inflation is a condition that causes a rapid increase in the economy's overall price level. Not just that, inflation is also characterized by too much money chasing too few goods. The authors have found that there are three various degrees of inflation, which are creeping inflation, mild inflation, and hyperinflation. Firstly, creeping inflation is a sustained rise in prices by about 2% per year. It can be defined as a continuous price increase within 2% per year. In other words, when the rate of inflation slowly increases over time, for example, the inflation rate rise from 2% to 3% to 4% a year. It also states that creeping inflation may not be immediately noticeable, but if the creeping rate of inflation continues, it can become an increasing problem. Secondly, it is mild inflation. Mild inflation or moderate inflation might look the same as creeping inflation, but it differs, which is a sustained rise in price by about 8% to 10% per year. This type of inflation occurs when the price level persistently rises over a period of time at a mild rate. When the rate of inflation is less than 10% annually, or it is a single-digit inflation rate, it is considered to be a mild, or we usually call it moderate inflation. Last but not least, hyperinflation. This is a very high level of inflation where it occurs when monthly price rise by 50% to 60% or more. In my view, hyperinflation is when prices skyrocket more than 50% a month. Hyperinflation usually involves price changing so quickly that it becomes a daily occurrence, and under hyperinflation, the value of money will decrease. It is very rare. In fact, most examples of hyperinflation occur when governments print money to pay for wars. For instance, Germany encountered hyperinflation in 1923, Zimbabwe in the 2000s, and Venezuela in 2010. Not only that, Hungary also encountered hyperinflation in 1947, and the world's largest economic holder at this time has also faced hyperinflation in 1944. For the United States, the last time America experienced hyperinflation was during its Civil War.
The purpose of inflation rate is to show the percentage of increase or decrease in prices for goods and services for a period of time. In the purpose of this group project, we can see the inflation rate for countries such as Malaysia, Pakistan, and Iran for the year 2014 and 2019 with the help of data from the World Bank. In 2014, the inflation rate in Malaysia was recorded at 3.143%, while inflation rate in Pakistan and Iran were at 7.189% and 16.607%. In 2019, the inflation rate in Malaysia was recorded at 0.663%, while inflation rate in Pakistan and Iran were at 10.578% and 39.907%. Therefore, the inflation rate in Malaysia has been decreasing from 2014 compared to 2019. Meanwhile, in Pakistan and Iran, the inflation rate has been increasing from 2014 to 2019.
Now, I will be explaining the two causes of inflation, which are demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. The first causes of inflation are demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation happens when aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply, hence inflation occurs. This occurs when aggregate demand rises due to four factors. There is an increase in consumer demand, an increase in government spending, an increase in firm investment, an increase in demand for the country's exports by people in foreign countries, or a combination of the four. As you can see here, the increase in aggregate demand above full employment from AD1 to AD2 increases the general price level from P1 to P2. However, the output will remain constant. Furthermore, the increase in aggregate demand from AD0 to AD1 will increase the general price level from P0 to P1 and the output from Y0 to YF. OYF in the diagram means the full employment aggregate output, where it is determined at the point of intersection of the aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve. This is because the supply constantly results in full employment, in which all resources are fully employed. Based on the diagram, the real output has reached the maximum limit. However, prices are still increasing, therefore the increase in the general price level results in demand pull inflation. The second causes of inflation are cost push inflation. Cost push inflation happens when there is a shift in aggregate supply, hence inflation occurs. To answer the question, it is an increase in the general price level caused by an increase in the cost of production. This happens as a consequence of the seller's activities. In other words, inflation occurs as a result of an increase in the cost of or supply prices of goods as a result of an increase in the cost of inputs. In terms of aggregate demand and aggregate supply functions, cost push inflation occurs in economic fields when there is no excess demand due to the pressure of various factors that shift the aggregate supply curve to the left, which are wage pull inflation, profit push inflation, and import push inflation. As you can see here, the increase in cost will shift the aggregate supply AS curve to the left AS1. In consequence, the equilibrium aggregate output falls from OYF to OY1, while the general price level increases from P0 to P1, while OYF is the full employment aggregate output that occurs when there is an intersection of the aggregate demand curve AD1 to aggregate supply curve AS0. Furthermore, the upward shift in the aggregate supply curve from AS1 to AS2 causes the price increase to P2. Thus, cost push inflation is the increase of the general price level.
In the field of economics, a continuous massive increase in the general price level is detrimental to the community's socio-economic interests, both in terms of current welfare and future economic development. That is why inflation affects consumers' real disposable personal income and expenditure practices, because the value of money has decreased and fewer goods can be purchased. When inflation happens, there are people who will gain and lose during this phase. The people who stand to gain from inflation are property owners such as real estate owners, who stand to benefit from inflation when property prices rise during an inflationary period, and also the shareholders. Since corporations' earnings are higher, shareholders earn higher dividends. The people who tend to lose from continuous inflation are the people with fixed wages such as salaried workers and retirees are the ones that suffer the most. Holders of government, bonds, bank, fixed deposit and life insurance plans and money are some of the other citizens who lose money during inflation.
Last but not least, let's observe the effects of inflation on savings, production, and balance of trade. During an inflation, the real income value of fixed deposits, bonds, life insurance policies, and the money possessed by an individual would decrease. According to Investopedia, real income refers to the purchasing power of a sum of money measured by the quantity of goods and services that can be purchased with it after taking the rate of inflation into account. As an effect, people will save less and instead opt to invest in non-financial sectors such as houses and land. But the central bank may attract the interest of the consumers to save more in their savings account by increasing the interest rate. In a hypothetical example, the rate of inflation in Malaysia has increased by 2% at the end of 2021, thus reducing the real income value of the money within a savings account. If the rates remain unchanged, consumers may be put off from saving money, but if the rates increase by the persuasion of Bank Negara, it will balance out some of the effects of inflation, thus encouraging people to save more. Next, moving to production. In an inflation, the general price level of goods and services rises, allowing the producers to make higher profits. Higher profit is possible as the rise in price is usually higher than the increase in cost. Motivated by the high profits, producers will increase their level of production and investment. Consequently, the increased production and investment will create more job opportunities and reduce the rate of unemployment. For instance, during inflation, the price of Nescafe rises from 17 ringgit to 20 ringgit. The increase enables the producers to make an extra profit of 3 ringgit per packet, and as a result will motivate the company to increase the number of packets produced. Last but not least, let's look at the balance of trade. During an inflation, the countries affected face a deficit balance of trade since the number of imports exceeds the number of exports. This is so as the price of domestic products have now become relatively more expensive than imported products. When the price of domestic products increases, they become less attractive to both foreign and local consumers. Consequently, the number of imports within a country increases as locals demand more of the relatively cheaper foreign products, while the number of export decreases as our relatively more expensive domestic products become less desirable. To illustrate, assume that the price of 5 kg of rice by a Malaysian brand is priced at 15 ringgit, but due to inflation within the Malaysian economy, causes it to rise to 20 ringgit. In contrast, the price of 5 kg of rice from a Thailand-based company is 16 ringgit, but is unaffected by the inflation in Malaysia. Due to its relatively cheaper price for the same amount of rice, Malaysians will opt for the latter brand.